This House must declare an environment and climate emergency. We have no time to waste. We are living in a climate crisis that will spiral dangerously out of control unless we take rapid and dramatic action now. This is no longer about a distant future. We're talking about nothing less than the irreversible destruction of the environment within our lifetimes of members of this House. Young people know this. They have the most to lose. I was, like many members of this House on all sides, deeply moved a few weeks ago to see the streets outside this Parliament filled with colour and noise by children chanting, "Our planet, our future." For someone of my generation, it was inspiring, but also humbling that children felt they had to leave school to teach us, adults, a lesson. The truth is, they are ahead of the politicians on this, the most important issue of our time. We are witnessing, I will give way in a moment, we are witnessing an unprecedented upsurge of climate activism, with groups like Extinction Rebellion forcing the politicians in this building to listen. For all the dismissive and defensive column inches the protesters have provoked, they are a massive and, I believe, very necessary wake-up call. Today, we have the opportunity to say, we hear you. Thank my friend for that intervention. Let us show today the political will is here in this Parliament to declare the climate emergency we believe to be necessary. So, Mr. Speaker, let us work more closely with countries that are serious about ending the climate catastrophe, especially those at the sharp end of this, like the small country, the Maldives, so vulnerable to rising sea levels. They told the UN climate talks last year, "We are not prepared to die," and implored countries to unite. And Bangladesh, whose foreign minister recently warned of the existential threat posed by climate breakdown to the 160 million people of his country. And he urged others to adhere to their commitments under the Paris Climate Change Agreement. I attended the Paris conference in 2015 with my good friend, the Honourable Member for Brent North, and I'd like to thank him for his passion at that conference, his commitment to environmental sustainability and the great work he did on forestry during the last Labour government. It's a pleasure to work with him. He, along with the whole Labour Party, strongly, and I just make this point, strongly support the UK's bid to host the UN Climate Change Conference in 2020, and I really hope that it does happen, and when it does happen, members of this House from all across the House will have a chance to interact with those attending that conference. And let's make clear to President Trump that he must re-engage with international climate agreements. And we must be absolutely clear-eyed about the Paris Agreement. It is a significant breakthrough, a huge breakthrough, but it is not enough. If every country meets its current pledges, if every country in the whole world meets its current pledges as per the Paris Agreement, temperatures will still rise by 3 degrees in this century. And at that point, Mr. Speaker, Southern Europe, the Horn of Africa, Central America and the Caribbean will be in permanent drought. Major cities like Miami and Rio de Janeiro would be lost to rising sea levels. At 4 degrees, which is where we're all currently heading with the rates of emissions that are going on, agricultural systems would be collapsing. This isn't just a climate change issue, it's a climate emergency. We're already experiencing the effects around us. Here at home, our weather is becoming more extreme. The Chief Executive of the Environment Agency recently warned that we're looking into what he called the jaws of death and could run short of water within 25 years. Yet at the same time, flash flooding is becoming more frequent. Anyone who has visited the scene of a flooded town or village knows the devastation it brings to families. That was vividly brought home to me when I visited Cockermouth after the 2015 floods, along with my good friend, the Honourable Member for Workington, who's doing such a brilliant job as Shadow Environment Secretary, who first challenged the government to declare a climate emergency a month ago. And around the world, we're seeing ice caps melting, coral reefs dissolving, droughts in Africa, hurricanes in the Americas, and wildfires in Australia. Cyclone Idai has killed more than 900 people in southeast Africa, mainly in Mozambique, and affected 3 million more, only to be immediately followed by the current horrors of Cyclone Kenneth. The heating up of our climate is contributing to the terrifying loss of animal and plant species, something we, sadly, are only just recognising. I remember working with and joining WWF when I was at school. And according to what they're saying now, this is Worldwide Fund for Nature, humanity has wiped out 60% of mammals, birds, fish and reptiles since 1970, a year many in this House can remember. Earlier this year, the first global scientific review of its kind found that insects could become extinct within a century unless action is taken. Insects pollinate plants and keep the soil healthy. Without pollination and healthy soil, there is no food, and without food, there is no life. Meanwhile, we are, I think, having far too much very intensive farming, pumping the earth with too many fertilisers and taking its toll on our soil. Soil degradation is a major issue, and anyone who reads any farming journals will pick up this all the time, the weakening of soil and soil structures and the need to strengthen them. A more sustainable farming system actually leads, in the longer run, to better yields and less cost in pesticides, herbicides and fertiliser. The Environment Secretary himself has warned that we only have 30 to 40 years left before our fertile soil is eradicated. So I hope he will be supporting the motion today. At the heart of the environment issue and climate emergency is really one of justice. It's those here and around the world who are least to blame for it, who bear the burden of it and the highest cost. A 2015 study found that children living in our British inner city areas can have their lung capacity reduced by up to 10% by air pollution on major roads. And of course, it's even more extreme for those children growing up in densely populated urban areas in India or China at the present time. We're damaging children before they reach the age of 5 by the levels of pollution in many cities around the world. Children shouldn't have to pay with their health for our failure to clean up our toxic air. In a moment. And it's working class communities that suffer the worst effects of air pollution. Those who are least able to rebuild their lives after flooding, who will be hit hardest by rising food prices, while the better off, who are sometimes more responsible for the most emissions, can pay their way out of the trouble. And internationally, in a cruel twist of fate, it's the global south which is facing the greatest devastation at the hands of drought and extreme weather. This fuels poverty and war and creates refugees as people are forced to flee their homes. Some, not all, but some of the 65 million refugees in this world now are in reality climate refugees. These people are paying the price of emissions that do not come from the global south, overwhelmingly come from the global north and rapidly industrialising societies. As Sir David Attenborough recently said in his, I believe, brilliant programme on television, I quote, "We now stand at a unique point in our planet's history, one where we must all share responsibility, both for our present well-being and for the future of life on Earth. That is the magnitude of what we're talking about, the future of life on Earth. It's too late for tokenistic policies or gimmicks. We have to do more. Banning plastic, good, important, but individual action is not enough. We need a collective response which empowers people instead of just shaming them if they don't buy expensive recycled toilet paper or drive the newest Toyota Prius. Mr. Speaker, if we're to declare an emergency, then it follows that radical and urgent action must be taken. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to avert the disastrous effects of warming greater than 1.5 degrees centigrade, global emissions must fall by about 45% by 2030 to reach net zero by 2050 at the absolute latest. It's a massive demand and it's a massive ask, and it's not going to happen by itself. So we are going to have to free ourselves from some of the harmful beliefs that have characterised our thinking for too long. The hidden hand of the market isn't going to save us. Technological solutions are not going to magically appear out of nowhere. An emergency of this magnitude requires large-scale government intervention to kick-start industries, to direct investment and to boost research and development in the green technologies of the future. And that is not a burden. The solution to the crisis is to reprogram our economy so that it works for the interests of both people and the planet. It means publicly owned energy and water companies with a mandate to protect the environment instead of just seeking profit. It means redesigning public agricultural funding to benefit local business and sustainable farming that supports biodiversity, plant life and wildlife. And it also means not unnecessarily flying basic products across the globe that could be transported in a more sustainable way. Members opposite will boast that the UK is reducing carbon emissions, but I have to tell them it's too slow. At the current rate, we will not reach zero emissions until the end of the century, more than 50 years too late. By that time, our grandchildren will be fighting for survival on a dying planet. The point Greta Thunberg made to me and others when we met her last week was, listen to the science, which I thought was a very impressive thing for her to say on behalf of all the young people that she was working with and speaking for. The IPCC has said, and I quote, that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade would require rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society, and that such action is urgent. The science says this is an emergency. But an emergency does not have to be a catastrophe. We could use it as an opportunity to rebuild our economy so that it works for the many, not the few. But it's time to not allow despair to take over. It's a time for action. We can do this. Government can improve the lives of our people while defending our natural world. What we do in this country can have an impact around the globe. So, Mr. Speaker, let's embrace hope. The children in school get it. They get it right away. They grasp the threat to their own future. And in fact, they want to be taught more about it as part of the curriculum and their normal school day. Are we to be content to hand down a broken planet to our children? That is the question we must ask ourselves.